जिंदगी के सफर में गुजर जाते हैं वो मकाम वो फिर नहीं आते. Whenever you're depressed in life, turn to that music of the 70s, early 70s. Kati Patang, Aapki Kasam, all kinds of fantastic movies where the music was just terrific. One of the reasons I've survived, I think, for so long is I sleep very well. You know, I believe at the end of the day, the only person I'm accountable to is my conscience. I have never used this profession for personal profiteering. I have been a professional for 32, 33 years. Should be journalists are cockroaches in the system. The politicians are the butterflies. Good luck to them. If I have any regrets, it's that I couldn't play cricket well enough to play for India. That's the regret I have.
So thank you so much, Rajdeep sir, for taking out time for India Podcast listeners and viewers. And we are very happy to have you with us today.
Thanks very much, Anku, for having me on your podcast.
In short, if you can tell me, how has this journey been? Because you have seen it in not just in working in print, television, but after a long journey in one of the leading media channel, you again reinvented yourself at a time when people don't even think of doing that.
First of all, as I said, thank you very much for having me on this show. 32 years is a long time. It'll be 33 years this year. So as you can see, the hair is completely white. And if you saw me in October or November of 1988, when I joined the profession, I have a photo somewhere, I think. The hair is completely black. So from black to white, I've discovered shades of gray, because I believe gray is the color of journalism, because there are often most issues are not black and white. And, gray is the color particularly of a newspaper. Look, I've just been lucky. When I joined the profession in 1988, there was no 24/7 news TV at all. Nor did I join this profession with the idea of entering television. I joined because I was obsessive and passionate about current affairs. So even though my training was in law, I think deep down inside, there was something about a newspaper in particular that was very attractive to me. And I jumped at the chance when I got that in October of 88 or November of 88 to join the Times of India. And I guess I've just evolved, you can use the word reinvented, but I would say just evolved with the profession over the years, or just, gone along with whatever professional transformations have taken place in these 32 years. So it's like being on a treadmill, because news is daily, whether it's a newspaper or a TV channel. TV channel, it's hourly. And I've been on a treadmill and someone has just taken off the ignition key and refuses to give me the key back. So I, once I'm on the treadmill and I can't switch it off, I've just gone along this treadmill of news for 32 years. And I think that passion for news is still there, that excitement for news. And I guess that's the thing that keeps me going, even when at times I'm down and cynical about where the profession is heading. Just that sheer excitement that a news story gives me.
Rajdeep, so very interesting thing you said, that your passion is still there. But a question that we have for you is, if given a chance to go back in time, with the condition that media is in now, because we don't know whether we are in the space that you started with. We've completely gone into a different idea of sending news information out. Would you choose news or journalism as your profession if I say go back to time and choose your profession again?
Would I do the same? I must confess that law was also a bug that I had. And when I think about it, had I stayed the course in law like I stayed in journalism, maybe I could have been a reasonably successful lawyer. I love to debate. I love to argue. But journalism, as I said, was something that was also part of me. I mean, I remember editing the Campion Review, my school magazine, or being part of the editorial board when I was 11 or 12. 1976 US presidential elections. I remember it was being shown at the USIS, not on TV, but on this large screen somewhere in the USIS library. And I remember rushing and spending the whole day, Gerald Ford versus Jimmy Carter, completely excited about the election. I remember tracking the 1980 election. I was 14 or 15. Then the Indira Gandhi election. When I was at Oxford also, I would write the occasional Oxford diary for the Times of India. So, look, I've always sort of had this great yearning or great passion for news. And I think that means that if you ask me, would I do it all over again? Maybe I would. Maybe I would. But as I said, it's not as if I haven't been tempted by law in particular over the years. These are the two professions, I think, which more than any others excite me.
Mr. Sardesai, then I want to know that you have been labeled, you have quite comprehensively spoken about it. You have been labeled as anti or pro or polarized when it comes to choosing your way in journalism. It is not true. It is true. You can tell us better. Is there something with anti-Modi? There was, because now we see a new image of Rajdeep Sardesai coming with the two books that you have written recently. So there's a confusion. Are you trying to change your stance, or are you trying to clear your image that I am not anti-Modi, so let me write something in favor, saying that he's reinvented himself according to me? How do you present yourself in that space right
No,
now?
no, I must be very honest. My two books are honest books. They're not about Modi's reinvention. They're about how Modi won two major elections, 2014 and 19. Now, if I don't try and explain that objectively, I'm failing to do my job as a journalist. I've always believed that whatever I may have on specific issues, serious differences with an individual or a political party or an ideology, but I am willing to have it tested over 30 years. I mean, I don't think you can test someone based on one story here or one event there, whether someone has been biased. And I think, unfortunately, society has become so polarized in the last 15, 20 years that you keep getting hit with this charge. That wasn't the case in the first 15 years of the journalism that I did. I think what happened post 2002, in particular, my coverage of the Gujarat riots, that, I was branded by people as anti-Modi. Just as I've written my books, which in a way, 2014 and 19 are two seminal elections, where Mr. Modi is the central character.
Yeah.
Similarly, 2002 riots and what happened in Gujarat, Mr. Modi again was the central character, but this time perhaps cast in a more, dare I say, villainous role. And I am very clear, therefore, that I am going to just report what I saw then, and I'm reporting what I saw in 2014 and 19 with the election. So a lot of people who read my election book say, you've been very critical of the Congress. I said, what else am I going to be? Rahul Gandhi has never missed an opportunity to miss an opportunity, as I write in the book. The Congress gets 44 seats in one election, 52 seats in the other. What am I going to write? I mean, surely he cannot then be a heroic figure. Similarly, Mr. Modi, has these two big majorities, and I've tried to understand why and how India has changed. So that's in the book. Similarly, in 2002, I have reported what I saw. And what I saw was a terrible communal riot in a city that I was born, where my grandfather, many, many decades ago, was the DG of police or the IG of police, a city that I have a huge emotional attachment to. And, what happened was a lot of innocents died. And therefore, am I not to report that? And is the government of the day not in some way to be held accountable? The problem is when I say that, people say, oh, but you didn't report 1984 when the Congress was in power. The fact was I was in college as a 19-year-old. I would have loved to report 84. I reported, actually, to tell you, Argu, the truth, the riot which I spent most of my time and emotional and journalistic energy was 92, 93, Mumbai riots. And we even brought out a book when Bombay burnt. Young journalists came together and brought out a book. Nobody read it because we were not famous. But the fact is that we put a lot of effort, and our reporting at Times of India in those days is something I'm extremely proud of as the news editor at the time. So, and there was a Congress government, NCP government in Maharashtra then. I remember Sharad Pawar throwing me out of a press conference because of the questions I asked. I was young. I used to ask questions. I still do. But, nobody remembers that because it was pre-TV. Gujarat was in the age of TV. It was there up front. It was India's first riot in the age of 24 hours TV. And therefore, the memory has stayed on. And Mr. Modi has, of course, from Chief Minister, gone on to be Prime Minister. Good luck to him.
Do you think he was harsh to you?
I have no personal animals against any individual. But I do strongly believe that as a journalist, my job is to ask questions and to report what I saw.
But did you think they were harsh to you, in particularly even Mr. Modi? I think there are a lot of instances where we saw them really make it appear to us that they are not liking it, or they are feeling that you're not fitting in the right way. Was it also a feeling that you got from them, or it was just a perception that was drawing everything in a way?
No, I think it's a mix of both perception and reality. Obviously, no political leader likes to be sort of, in a way, dare I use the word,
Question.
exposed or questioned. And Mr. Modi was no different. And actually, the irony is, I had a very good relationship with Mr. Modi, a personal relationship in the 90s in particular. And I don't call myself friends with politicians, but Mr. Modi was a politician I got along with. I've written in my 2014 book how whenever I would be running short of a BJP guest, the last guest that I would turn toward Mr. Modi, and he would never say no to me. In fact, famously in Gujarat, during the riots, he gave me 2 interviews on the same day because in the first interview, our tape got stuck. So I told him, I need to come back and do the interview. So
And
look,
he
and he
allowed
never
you.
said no. When my
Yes.
father passed away, he was among the first people to call me up and condole. So look, I have, and I really appreciate that he was keeping his personal equation separate from what may have gone wrong or right professionally. I have, I have, I respect the fact that he has taken this long journey in life, in politics, and gone to where he is. It's inspirational in many ways. But that does not stop me from critiquing him when
Yes.
he gets it wrong. When he gets it right, I am more than happy to endorse a government decision. I think, unfortunately, I come back to it. Society has become so polarized that today,
Yes.
if I say a good word about Mr. Modi, people will say sold out. If I say a bad
That's what
word
is
about Mr.
happening.
Modi, they'll say, "Arey, you're a anti-Modi." I mean,
Yes.
come on. I am. Unfortunately, newsrooms have got polarized. Society has got polarized. Politics has got polarized, and I regret it because this is not the milieu in which I did my journalism. You could criticize politicians in the 1990s, but they didn't become your enemies. Today, when you criticize them, and I see it with younger politicians, they say, "मैं राजदीप के show पर नहीं आऊँगा." I mean, I feel bad because not about, I mean, you're free not to come. All the, they think access is power. But my point is that you are, at the end of the day, public figures. And public figures must be questioned and interrogated. And I say this not just about BJP, but about Congress as well. Sonia Gandhi did an interview with me famously a few years ago, and then said that I will not take any political questions. And therefore, I was not able to ask those questions. The interview, therefore, was seen as a soft interview. I got flack, and perhaps, I accept that, and it was legitimate at one level. But what do I do when politicians are unwilling to take questions anymore? They don't like to be questioned.
In your book, you have mentioned the 2014 book that in page number 160, when you met Amit Shah during the Gujarat re-election on the background of the riots in Gujarat, you were mobbed by people who had a nara that said, "ये वही सरदेसाई है जो दंगे में हमारे खिलाफ है." And this is not a rare incident with you. We had one more in New York. This is not just an incident. We see it from the outside. Okay, you are tagged like that, so treated. How is it to take as a journalist? Because this is as a part of Indian media, how do you deal with it?
Not only was I was kicked around, and this was in a city, as I said, I grew up and I loved. I have a lot of friends in Ahmedabad, so it was unfortunate. I felt sad about it. In my 2019 book, I write about what happened in Madison Square Garden.
Yes.
And again, it's something, the heckling was something which I was, disappointed with. But it's part of life. That I can live with. I can live with all of that. That is something I think, if you can't stand the heat, you've got to get out of the kitchen. Today in journalism, this is something that comes with the territory, especially in the age of social media, where anyone can say anything and get away with it. You can abuse me, you can abuse my family, and I have no recourse to strike back. Fair enough. My conscience is clean. One of the reasons I've survived, I think, for so long is I sleep very well. I believe at the end of the day, the only person I'm accountable to is my conscience. And I sleep well on a very soft pillow. And I listen to Kishore Kumar's music. I watch Sachin Tendulkar and Gavaskar's old videos. And I say, "Theek hai, jisko jo bolna hai, bol de." And yes, I would be lying if at times it hasn't got to me. But in general, I believe over 32, 33 years, that's a long enough period to have, to have a sort of, to have done enough of journalism to live with such, to live with the odd incident where you get targeted.
But Mr. Sardesai, were you prepared, like as a young journalist facing this kind of heckling, which is life-threatening? Because when I spoke to other journalists, they said it is, and especially women journalists, they're not easy to take it and they sometimes withdraw from that space. As a, does the same fear come in you that anything can happen to me when I'm working in that, with that honesty and not selling myself?
To be honest, in all these years, that's, I've never been afraid of going in and meeting people, even people who may not necessarily agree with my point of view, or where the crowd may be hostile. I've always believed it's important to reach out. That samvad and dialogue is essential. So I've never been fearful of going into crowds, meeting people. That's not been a. But yes, I think sometimes the trolling, when it becomes about, look, why should my family members be held accountable for something I've done? When they get targeted, I remember there was an Insta post or something where my daughter or son were targeted. That's when I feel enough is enough. That's where you got to draw a line. You can say what you want to me. I have no issues. People make all kinds of lies and allegations. In another world, they should be sued for defamation. But I'm not going to waste my time on that. I keep saying, if somebody has, please, if there's something I've done wrong, please investigate, please find out. I can say I have never used this profession for personal profiteering. I have been a professional for 32, 33 years. Yes. And I've seen various governments over the years. Sarkare aati hai, jati hai. Patrakar to wahi ka. I keep making this joke that, I met Mr. Modi in 1990 for the first time when I was a young reporter. It was one of my first big assignments covering the Rath Yatra. And I keep telling people, oh, I was a reporter then, I am a reporter today. Mr. Modi was then the General Secretary of Gujarat Congress, today is Prime Minister. He's the Prime Minister. He's gone from year to year. I am where I am. And that's the way it should be. Journalists are cockroaches in the system. The politicians are the butterflies. Good luck to them.
One very interesting point you have always raised is about election coverage. Do you think we can depend on the journalist's prediction and the way the field work is done? Because we see most of the reportage, whether it is with your channel or any channel, quite limited to the number of bites and survey that is done on ground. So you really think that now people can depend on the survey of different channels and the kind of election coverage you did and the kind you see now happening? Is there a difference there?
Look, there are two parts. One is election surveys. And I think it's very difficult to get an accurate and credible survey in a country like India. It's a complex country. And increasingly, elections are now localized and sometimes even hyper-localized, where one constituency votes differently to the neighboring constituency. Capturing that, not easy. And it's unfair to expect an exit poll to be exact. I think it can give a broad trend. I do find that many of the pollsters like Pradeep Gupta of Axis are making a genuine effort to try and at least capture the trend. And more often than not, Pradeep has got his trends pretty much spot on. But every time you get it wrong, people say all polls are terrible. So, and what happens as a result is that the anchor, I'm only reading out the numbers of the pollster. But as an anchor, I get the flack every time a poll is wrong. Again, you're sold out. It's very easy to keep saying sold out. We actually pay the pollster. The pollster gets the money. I don't even get, I just read out the numbers that the pollster does. I do believe, though, that we need to have greater accountability of pollsters, that the system needs to be more rigorous and transparent. How did you do your survey, your raw data? More details need to be put out in the public domain. And I think pollsters need to also get their act together in that sense. As journalists, I believe journalists in an election can only give a sense of the various trends on the ground. I don't think we can predict an election. Very difficult for a journalist.
But how do you give that sense? By talking to the panwala or talking to...
Good question. No, but look, I have always believed that just bring out the color. This is the most magnificent country in the world in just the color, the voices. Just listen to people. And let them, it's an opportunity for the voter, the people to have their say. Over the years, the election programming on the ground that I've done is largely focused around people and their issues. I may do elections on my plate, the food may be there and people say, "Arey khana, you're having a good time." I'm not. Food is only a backdrop. I want to listen to the voices of people. Okay. I don't think as journalists we listen enough to people's voices. Yeah, and the more we can, then the more reportage, without saying ye jeet raha hai, wo jeet raha hai. That's very difficult. Occasionally, you might get a sense in a wave election. I certainly got the sense, I'll be honest, both in 2014 and 19 that Mr. Modi was winning. And I have got it even on record 15 days before, I think, the 2019 results, doing a short video blog where I said, that Mr. Modi is going to win. But I don't think that's what good election reporting. It's not about who's winning or losing, as much as being able to just get a sense of the electorate in the broadest possible term. You can provide a sort of kaleidoscope of different views and images that hopefully bring out an Indian election. So that if you ask me today, for example, who's winning Bengal, is
Yes,
BJP
please do
winning?
tell me. I'm sitting here and I
No,
can
I
give
know
you
you're
a
sitting
sense.
in Kolkata, so I would find that very difficult even after I travel through Bengal to say with any accuracy. But what I do believe I can do is, it's a fascinating election in terms of just getting the voices of the people of Bengal out and their various concerns and issues. That's all you can really do.
But
The
the
rest,
voices
I
might
leave
not be
the
the
number I
reality.
leave to pollsters. I don't get
The
into the
voices
number
can't be the
crunching.
reality.
Yeah, I mean, it's very difficult. An Indian election is very difficult to predict accurately numbers. Very difficult.
So what is your sense about Bengal? I want to know this before I go to the next
What is
one.
my sense about Bengal? I don't
Yes,
know.
please.
I mean, look, 4 months to go. I'm going to play safe. It obviously is a tough election for both sides, for the BJP and for Mamta, who are the two main contenders, and that in itself shows how much India has changed. I remember covering a Bengal election in great detail in 2001. Uh, I think Buddhadev Bhattacharya's
Yes.
big victory, and traveling through rural Bengal, and then it was all about the communists. Mamta was challenging them, but the communists were dominant. They swept the election.
From history.
And then I remember covering 2011, when Mamta sort of stormed into power for first time, and you could sense the wave in the state. I haven't traveled to Bengal yet, so I can't sense anything at the moment, sitting where I am in Delhi. But it's going to be a tough and fascinating election.
Mr. Sardesai, one thing that I definitely want to know from you when we talk about media ethics, we have never seen Mr. Sardesai easily lose his cool. But there is an accusation on you that are you not good with taking criticism? What made you go on air with your colleague journalist in whichever manner, whatever reason, against a TRP thing? Like you went on air for the first
Yeah.
time. We don't see that being part of the way we have seen you conduct
Yeah,
yourself.
I mean, on hindsight, and hindsight is of course easier said than done. I should have avoided it. It's not something I don't want to personalize. Anything that's going on around me at the moment to whatever extent. As I get older, I believe that one should, all resentments and grudges need to be kept aside. I had a very good personal and professional relationship with an Arnab Goswami, for example, when we were together at NDTV. I have only happy memories. I keep telling friends that, Arnab and I went together to watch the 2003 World Cup final. I took my father, who was ailing, and my son. So it was a very special experience. We went to South Africa. There has been a betrayal of certain cardinal principles of this profession. And one of this is this constant attempt to, vilify everyone else. So you can say what you want about others, but when I tomorrow say something, I'm the bad guy. Why? I mean, you have every right, in a way, it appears, to use your platform to abuse everyone else in the world. And if one person points one finger at you, you don't like it. I mean, that to my mind is unfortunate. I mean, I think we all need to step back and ask ourselves: have we really done justice to this great TV revolution that's taken place over the last 2 decades and a half? And the answers, I think, can only be answered with, if we are honest to ourselves, we'll accept that maybe at times we've betrayed, the sort of the potential that TV had in setting the agenda in a truly positive manner, in an honest manner, in an honest, factual manner. News has been replaced by noise, sense by sensation, credibility by chaos. And I think we need to ask ourselves why. Why has this happened? And I hope we are honest about it.
With the Ria interview that happened with Sushant Singh Rajput case, a lot that day when you went for the interview, did you have anything in mind? What's going to turn out of it? Because it just became something else for people to talk about. It was, I mean, again, you were targeted and said it was a soft interview, as you mentioned. If you don't ask tough questions, you do a soft interview. Did you make it a soft interview? What really went wrong, or was it right? Don't regret it.
No, I believe that, frankly, and I speak here as a pure professional, I believe it was one of the best interviews I've done. All the questions that could have been asked have to be asked. What is a soft question versus a hard question? You don't have to get into a constant interrogation and treat someone as a criminal. I mean, Ria for me was someone who had to answer certain questions, but I didn't treat her as a criminal. Does that make it a soft interview? No, I have to draw her out. She also obviously was tense to do the interview. Not easy. We did it after midnight, but I had to get answers out of her. And I think we got a lot of answers. And look, at the end of the day, proof is in the pudding. It increasingly appears that Ria was unfortunately targeted in some manner or the other. The case is still on, but clearly this is what judges have also seemed to suggest, that there is no evidence against her. But forget that. My job as a journalist is to ask the questions. And I think we asked almost all the questions that needed to be asked. You could argue that, why were you not more confrontational?
Yes, why were you not more loud? That is what people said, because I love saying
why? The best interviews are not necessarily those. Also, let me tell you, I had never heard of Ria Chakrabarti till June, July of 2020. I don't follow that world that closely. It just so happened that she, was suddenly in the public eye because of the Sushant case. And that's how, through a lawyer who was willing to help us get the interview. We got the interview. Ria's some friend had rung me up. I remember saying that she appreciated a tweet that I had written. And when I had written the tweet also, I had never met Ria Chakrabarti. So I had nothing to do with her. I just felt the way the case was being played out was, trial by media. I thought she deserved a chance to be heard. And that's what we did. I treated as a professional going on, going to Mumbai, interviewing her past midnight and putting out the interview in the public domain. Then it's for the public to judge, for the courts to judge whether she's guilty or not. I've done my job. So I have no regrets about that interview whatsoever. In fact, I believe it was possibly one of the best interviews of 2020.
Did you feel disappointed when people started trolling you on that?
No, not at all. You see, what I feel disappointed is that we have become so polarized that even an issue like Ria Chakrabarti and Sushant Singh Rajput become, divide society. I mean, people who have no clue about, who don't even know probably Sushant or Ria, make all kinds of comments, campaigns are started. Again, as I said, noise has replaced news. And the Sushant case is a classic example of it.
Do you think you've been misunderstood in your entire journey? Is Rajdeep Sardesai the misunderstood mystic man? Can we see that?
No, look, that would be, giving myself too much of self-importance to say, look, I again maintain, I've just been privileged to be on this journey. So why should I see myself as being misunderstood? I wish more people, yes, would try to make an effort to perhaps have a dialogue or samvad, as I call it. I would, relish that without the name calling. That would make me a little happier. But I have great kids. My daughter just brought me this shirt that became a bit of that went viral. This shirt is white, Indian media. So you have a great daughter like that who's a lawyer. My son is a doctor. He spent the last year, treating COVID patients, which is terrific. Sagrika is her own person. She, beat me to the Rhodes Scholarship interview in 1986. I haven't forgiven her for that. She's she's the real writer. So, I've been very privileged that my parents have been very, supportive over the years. If I have any regrets, it's that I couldn't play cricket well enough to play for India. That's the regret I have. I wanted to be Sunil Gavaskar. I grew up in the 70s. My dad played for India, and my dad had no, he came from a small town in Goa. He's the only Goa-born cricketer till date to play for India. 300 people have played almost for India. He's the only Goa-born. Had no facilities, did it all on his own, self-made. So, I have been much more privileged. But yeah, I wish I could have played. I had half his talent. I would have played for India. If I had half his talent and all the facilities I had, I would have played for India. So that's my regret. Journalism to aata jata rehta.
Totally. So before we go to the fun segment, we have one caller for you. We call upon Shailesh Sharma. So Shailesh, if you can hear us, or you can just
Hi, Rajdeep.
Hi.
Good afternoon from snowy Russia. Potentially, in how many years and how will this model be changed in your view so that people can pay for high quality news, but their attention is not abused? Thank you.
Terrific question, because it really is fundamental to the crisis at the moment of the media. Because I think the media, let me put it broadly speaking, newspapers today face a crisis of relevance. Younger people are not reading print newspapers by and large. TV faces a huge crisis of content because you're driven by TRPs, as you said, to catch eyeballs, not necessarily by what is true. So you're looking for sensation, you're looking for drama, you are creating drama, you're pushing the media more and more into tabloidization. And digital suffers from a serious crisis of revenue generation because no one is willing to pay for news. Some legacy brand like a New York Times or a Wall Street Journal or an Economist may have succeeded with a subscription model, but they are exceptions. Then you rely on philanthropy. So I think at the end of the day, that's the hope, that you'll have enough Indian billionaires who will actually want to see media as a corporate social responsibility. But until that happens, the crisis you speak of will only get worse. We are at a stage today where the news industry faces a serious crisis of commerce, of confidence, of credibility, all the C's that I can think of, and there are a few more as well. And I think unless we can, make news a philanthropic exercise, like Al Jazeera, where the Emir of Qatar puts a lot of money into it, or the BBC model, where the taxpayer pays in a way, you need to create or a strong subscription model like CNN. If we can't create these new models, we're going to struggle in the years ahead.
Okay, so going to the end of the show, thank you so much for being so kind to us, so candid. I have Chetna, she's a mass comm student and very important part of India podcast. She's joined us to hold this fun question segment with you because we want to take out that other aspect of you which you have, I'm sure. So Chetna,
hello. Hi sir, am I audible?
Hi, yes Chetna, you are very much audible.
Yes, so it's been great. I'm pretty sure I'm going to rewatch this entire interview and just make notes. So I'm going to ask you a couple of questions. All you need to do is answer them as quickly as you can. You don't get even a second to think. You have to say whatever comes in your head, okay? Okay, so first few ones are, you have to choose between like two, okay? So Twitter or Facebook?
Twitter.
Books or old music?
Old music.
Journalist or author?
Tough one. I can't choose. Both, but journalist, I guess.
Okay, fair enough. An anchor or a field reporter?
Oh, reporting.
Okay, that's great.
Okay,
so next ones are your first ever. So there must be a lot of memories. So let's just like go down that lane. Okay, so your first ever paycheck?
I think it was about $1,000 or $1,200 from the Times of India, 1988 November. May even have been less than that. I'm not sure, but somewhere between $800 and $1,200.
What did you do with it? Do you remember?
Yeah, exactly.
I don't even remember, but what I remember at the Times of India, when I tried to get an increment or tried to say I should get a little bit more, they said, "Hey, but you're working for the Times of India." So the HR guy said, working for the Times of India itself is an increment.
Okay.
So your first big interview?
My first big interview. One of the first was Bal Thackeray, I think 88 November or December, within a month of joining, maybe 88 December, Bal Thackeray, Shiv Sena chief. VP Singh also was sometime early, but I think Bal Thackeray happened before that.
How was it?
It was great. In fact, I don't know whether it was the first or second interview where he offered me warm beer. He would serve people warm beer. And there was I, this South Mumbai kid meeting Bala Sahib. And, it was interesting. It was in the age of course, it was a print interview. But I remember the beer that he served. Now, how many politicians would do that? Actually, in one of the interviews, he even gave me red wine. So, he was quite open on camera.
Okay, so it's been a long journey. Any story that you reported and like the first story that you remember, which was wrong, or maybe a story that you regret now looking back?
I don't know. I mean, as I said, the first big period of reporting for me was between 90 and 93, the riots and the blasts of Mumbai. covering the Rath Yatra. No real regrets in that period. So I can't think of something that comes to mind and say, oh shit, I shouldn't have done that. No. I remember writing a very controversial piece on the Mumbai blast of '93 called Muslims and the Blast. And it got me into trouble because people thought I was supporting Dawood Ibrahim, which is completely bullshit. If people read it carefully, they'll realize it. But, maybe I could have worded some of the things better. It got me into trouble as always. And, that's something I remember. But I wish people read that piece. I was just trying to make the point because I'd seen Dawood in Sharjah during an India-Pakistan match waving the Indian flag in '92 October. '93 March, he's responsible for blasting Mumbai. And I raised the question, what changed between '92 and '93? And we cannot have these patriotism tests where waving a flag or standing up in a cinema theater, you become a patriot. Because by then, by that token, Dawood becomes a patriot. So that's the point I was making. Immediately, I was attacked. So I remember that, but maybe I could have worded that better.
But Mr. Lavdesai, can you close with your favorite song? Can we see you singing something?
Oh.
We generally do that. Most of our guests have done that.
Okay. There are a few songs, but I guess my all-time favorite is Rajesh Khanna, Aapki Kasam, lyrics Anand Bakshi, music R.D. Burman, voice of Kishore Kumar. जिंदगी के सफर में गुजर जाते हैं वो मकाम वो फिर नहीं आते. That is the song. Don't ask me to sing it, but that's the best I can do. You've got to hear the word. Brilliant lyrics. And, yes. That period in the 70s, Rajesh, R.D., Anand Bakshi, Kishore, whenever you're depressed in life, turn to that music of the 70s, early 70s. Kati Patang, Aapki Kasam, all kinds of fantastic movies where the music was just terrific. Amar Prem, each movie better than the other. I'm not a great singer, but I enjoy listening to Kishore Da. Something you must leave to the masters. Kishore Da and Mohammad Rafi, masters.